that, I'm going to hand it over to Marc. Marc is the creator of NodeXL. What else is your title? He's a sociologist who deals with network mapping, and he's going to tell you all about, and I actually use network mapping so frequently. At first I was really intimidated because it looks really crazy and complicated, but now he takes it a step further and digests it, makes it super easy, and every time I get a network map from Marc, I know the top hashtags and the top domains used in any keyword or hashtag, or account. So it's very helpful stuff. So here you go.
Thank you. Hi, folks. I'm Marc. I'm a sociologist. It's good to be here. Any sociologists? None? I'll be your sociologist tonight. Thank you. I am a sociologist of the internet. I want to understand this thing, the being online thing, the social media thing, and I'm governed by the rules of sociology, which means that I have to know stuff about this domain through data. And so there's some data. That's a 3D rotating visualization of relationships in social media. That's the relationships in Twitter. What I will show you today is a series of well, I'm going to take you to a couple of web pages, and if you've got your browser handy, you can follow along. One site that I am pretty sure I'd like you to visit is NodeXLGraphGallery.org. Works on your phone. NodeXL Graph Gallery. That's NodeXL. That's the network overview, discovery, and exploration add-in for Excel. NODE. It's an acronym. We're kind of geeky. And what NodeXL tries to do is make for networks, make them as accessible and easy to handle as a pie chart. So any Excel users in the house? Any Excel users? All right, that's most people. For the people who said no to Excel, really? Really no to Excel? Sort of, okay. And so my challenge is, how many people here think that if their lives depended upon it, you could make a pie chart? Okay, it's pretty much everybody. Our mission is to make it so that if you can make a pie chart, you can now make a network chart. Now my job is to convince you, why would you want to? We've made it easier. There's a few buttons you now press in Excel, but I'd like to convince you that not only is it not good news that you could make a network chart, but that you want to make a network chart. So back to point one, I'm a sociologist, and sociologists see the world a little differently. We tend to think of societies as networks. We think of you not so much as an individual, but more as a nexus of lots of relationships. You are sister, mother, daughter, friend, coworker. You're a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In sociology, we've developed a language and some mathematics and a way of drawing webs of relationships, collections of connections. And social network theory turns out to be a pretty useful thing in a network society. And it turns out, if you look around, we're repeatedly told that we live in a network society. But I think we still have some challenges in this network society. I offer you 5 challenges. Where do you get a network? What do you put it in? How do you do it, whatever it is that you do to a network that gets you more networky stuff out of it? How do you draw a picture of it? And how would you share an insight into this network thing with another human being? All under this other constraint. You are not a PhD in computer science. Oh, by the way, any PhDs in computer science? No? Call me. Any programmers in the house? One. Call me, yeah. So they're rare, right? They're really important. So for the non-programmers, what we seek to do is make network domesticated for the rest of us. I am not a coder, I'm a social scientist, but I have big data dreams. I live in a world where my phenomena has moved online. I want to study collective action, groups of people getting stuff done together. That's what sociology is all about. But where did all of that go? It all moved online. And so if I'm going to study collective action, I might actually have to be studying connected action, the collective action that happens when people tweet and follow and friend and so on. So what we're going to look at today are these things, these maps. And I think what I'll do is I'll bring up one that is about OCTribe, because that might make it a little bit clearer. Many of you may appear on this screen in minutes. So what we've done is built a tool that makes it a lot easier to go out and get network data, hopefully network data that matters to you, often from social media data sources like Twitter or Flickr or Facebook or YouTube, coming soon Instagram. We do wikis and blogs, Flickr, and there's an interesting thing about all of those platforms, despite the fact that they're all very different from one another. Wikis are not blogs. Blogs are not YouTube. YouTube is not Twitter. But they all have one thing in common, and that is they all make networks. They all form connections between people. And so what I'd like to do, let's go back up here. There we go. Is tell the story of how we can learn to gain some insight into these collections of connections, these webs of relationships. You can find me out there on the web for a guy named Smith. It's remarkable how Google can find me. Add the word NodeXL. That does it. You'll be right there. So let's start here, and I'm going to make this argument. Crowds matter. Whenever 750,000 of your closest friends gather, there's not much you can't do. The interesting thought is that whenever a crowd like this gathers, if I tell you that thousands of people have gathered in front of City Hall, invariably somebody sends a photographer. And those photographs are artifacts that are newsworthy. You might even see one on the cover of the newspaper. Crowd gathers, it's news. Yet when crowds gather online, what we see is a list. We see a serialized version of a crowd. It would be as if Mr. Obama asked his crowd to line up single file by the recency of their comment. And they did, and you would get that. And that's what Twitter looks like. The question is, can we recover from this serialized list of messages the underlying shape of the crowd? Can we see the crowdness of social media? And of course, that's a rhetorical question. The answer is yes. I'll get to that in a minute. But I'm going to pause now and just note, this is a book about NodeXL. There you go, the book. I think if I was better trained on television, I would do this. There we go. And there's a yellow sheet of paper there, and it's just waiting to get your email address. And when that happens, you'll get a PDF of the book. So I'm going to start over here, sir, if I can, hand you a copy of the book, and if you want to look through it, and then do that if you like. So what's a crowd in social media look like? Especially a political one. Is there any way to recover the web of connections of who replies to who retweets who's friending and following and replying and mentioning who? And the answer is yes, and it kind of looks like that. So each little square is a Twitter profile photo. Some are bigger than others because some people have more followers than others. And each of the lines is, I replied to you, I mentioned you. And some people have only one line. They replied or mentioned one person. They retweeted typically. And then there are the people who are really at the center of things. A lot of people reply and mention them. And then it's clear that this is not one crowd, this is actually two crowds. And can you imagine in US political discussions that there's division? Apparently the data shows there's a lot of division in US political topics. And we can even recover the words used most frequently by the people within these clusters. Those are the labels at the top of the boxes. And from that, I suspect you can derive a sense of, well, who's who? Left or right? Red or blue? Well, you know, I see one group is citing TCOT, GOP, Rubio, T-Lot, P2. Who could they be? And then there's this other group, Forward on Climate, Wall Street Sales Tax, Jobs Unite Blue. Okay, so it's puzzling. It would demand a lot of additional research, but you might be able to form a hypothesis about who's who. And so what we want to do is make recovering the connected structure of really anything, but certainly we live in a connected world, and therefore social media is replete with connections. In fact, if you have a form of social media that does not generate connections, you don't actually have social media. You might have digital media, but you don't have social media. And so we are interested in figuring out how to draw the pictures, build the tools that generically look for collections of connections, and more specifically, Twitter, Facebook, Flickr, YouTube, Instagram, your email, wikis, blogs, message boards, email lists. Pretty much every form of social media has a network in it. The question is, what's the shape of that network? Who are the people who occupy key positions within this network? Does that network actually have an overarching shape? Does it have neighborhoods or groups, divisions? What's the shape of the crowd? And there's a little poster we brought, and we're going to take it down later. We covered up other people's stuff. We don't mean to be rude, but you can see, and you can see this when you go to NodeXL Graph Gallery.org on your browser, that the crowd does not have just only one shape. It actually has a number of shapes, and that we could learn to read the shape of the crowd. So network theory's been with us for a while. It's 300 years in mathematics. Its name there is topology. When it comes to sociology in the 30s, first in New York City, through the work of Jacob Moreno, a Romanian immigrant to the US. And he invents something that he calls psychological geography. The name changes later to sociometry. It then becomes social network theory. We're sticking with that name. That's it. No more name changes. But social network analysis has had quite a renaissance as the computation needed to compute networks has become plentiful, and the networks to compute about them have also become plentiful. And so we can start to see network concepts percolating into the culture. There is a great cartoon out there. You can follow the link at the top. And a perfect slide for this, a very techie town. So can you characterize your favorite tech company by the social network structure of its internal organization? I will say that I spent 10 years at Microsoft, and this is absolutely not accurate. Accurate, yes, it's accurate. Under Mr. Nadella's leadership, the guns have been traded up to railguns, so they're moving up. But, you know, and no doubt the red dot at the center of Apple was Mr. Jobs. And, you know, you can get a sense for how different organizations might be shaped in terms of how centralized or broken apart, hierarchical they may be. And so there is this language of dots and lines, and it's starting to show up. In fact, I think if you look at the OCTribe logo, you get the little glyph of dots and lines. Everywhere you look, you get these dots and lines, but, oh, well, thank you, thank you. There you go. But are they metaphor or data structure? we want to move from metaphor to data structure. We want to say, we can domesticate this. You don't have to be a Python dev. You don't have to be a C# developer. You don't have to be a database person to build a pie chart. And therefore, you don't have to do that in order to build these things. In fact, what we're trying to be is the equivalent of the early point-and-shoot chemical camera. This is the Kodak Brownie snapshot camera, one of the first hockey stick kind of commercial consumer products. It single-handedly, it has no hands, but you know, it was the main thing that turned photography from a profession into a hobby. And it was the beginning of 1 or 2 trillion chemical photos from the teens or 20s to, well, when did Kodak finally give up? Sometime in the 90s, I think. It was the end of cartridge film. But in that time of maybe 80 or 90 years, a trillion and a half snapshot camera photos were taken. Those photos were amateur photos, but they're now the documentation of a time now gone. I have pictures of my grandmother standing in front of her new car, and she's very proud, and you're really seeing a window, a very small window, into an earlier time. But clearly we don't want this anymore. Maybe we want the disposable camera. We might as well go digital, so we surely want the digital camera, but a digital camera not for taking pictures of physical crowds. A digital camera for taking pictures of a virtual crowd. But I realized that this device also just went extinct, didn't it? I mean, who would actually go out and buy a camera? You want this. You want the app. And so what we want to be is a camera app for taking pictures of crowds that happen to be virtual. And so that camera looks like this. And this is NodeXL, the Network Overview, Discovery, and Exploration add-in for Excel. And it's another menu in your Excel ribbon. And in that menu are all the buttons you need to get a graph, analyze the graph, visualize the graph, and publish it to the web. And in fact, you can do that with about 4 clicks. You can say, go get this data, automate it, run, and then it's on the web. Because the point is not to learn how to grind all of the data, it's to look at the results. And in a few seconds, I hope we'll turn to what can be seen when you look at these kinds of maps. Admittedly, they don't immediately jump off the page and make themselves clear to you, in part because there is visual literacy to develop. I know at one point my kids brought home bar charts and line charts because their teacher was teaching them how to read a line chart. It doesn't come for free. We don't just get born with a copy of the Wall Street Journal turned to the stock ticker page. In the same way, sadly, we have yet as a culture to develop the visual literacy of networks. But it's not so hard, and I suspect it's coming. And why not get ahead of it? Once you can see that the dots are things and the lines are relationships and that patterns emerge, then it's easier and easier to get some insight. It's just another ribbon in the menu. You press a few buttons, you get some more data, out comes a report. We do recommend having 2 screens. It's wonderful to have the second screen. You put your graph over on one side and all the metadata in the workbook is on the other screen. And using this, we've put it into the hands of tens of thousands of people, and they have gone on to take tens of thousands of pictures with it. And these pictures have started to tell us a story about the range of variation of the crowds that form in social media. They're not all the same. And we're starting to get a sense of, oh, look, if you see this shaped crowd, it means these kinds of things. And so the goal here is to provide enough people with this tool that you will go and take a picture. We would like you to take pictures of your hashtag, your topic, your Facebook group, your wiki, your blog, because we want to see these pictures accumulate on Graph Gallery. And only when we have a few tens of thousands, we now have 60 or 70,000 of them up there, but when there are millions, we'll know something for sure about the landscape of social media, a landscape that we don't know that well. We know the physical landscape quite well. Every one of us has a phone, and on that phone is Google or Apple's maps, and those maps go down to the millimeter on pretty much the entire planet. There are no points on the map where it's like, well, there might be dragons here, we just haven't sent the Google map car out yet, we don't know. So most of the Earth's pretty well mapped. The same cannot be said for most of Reddit or Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. We just don't know what it looks like. And yet this is where we're spending our time. And it's where our culture, it's where civil society, it's where it's happening. It's happening in Twitter and it's happening in Nextdoor. And we don't know what these crowds really look like. And so our organization, the Social Media Research Foundation, seeks to produce the tools and to foster the research and the use of these tools to answer these questions. What does it look like when people interact with each other online? And the answer, in part, is starting to show up on the NodeXL Graph Gallery, where you can find maps, perhaps for topics of relevance to your interest. And you can, of course, request additional ones. There's going to be a link, I think, in one of the tweets that brings you to connectedaction.net, where there's a request a map button. And you can get one of these made for you if you don't want to make them yourself. It does take some effort. You have to have Windows, you have to have Office, you have to install it, you have to figure it out and know how to use it. It can take, 2 or 3 hours to go through the learning curve. For those who don't want to go through that, then there's the ask for a map, get a map, and then in a few more slides we're going to talk about, well, these maps, what do you learn? What do you get when you do this? But what I hope you'll just see when we look at them, having not really learned the landscape of, or the Rosetta Stone of network structures, already I think you can see, well, they're kind of different from each other. There are certain patterns that occur frequently. There's this big circle or the wagon wheel shape. Then there's this rectangle. There's rows and columns. What's that going to mean? Some of them have lots of little clusters. Some of them do not. Let's just keep that aside for a second. Let's keep looking at them. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and we can look at them and start to see some structures that are common. And what I want to get to is not what I thought was coming up. So let's keep going. So we'll just say almost everything that you're doing online is causing a connection. You're getting all sorts of ways of authoring a link to another person, the follow, the friend, the reply, the mention. And every time you do that, you're creating the raw material of a network analysis. The term of art is an edge. An edge is the thing that links one thing to another thing. So most of us were trained in a view of data science where things have attributes. You have an income, you have a height, you have a blood type, you have a propensity to click on things, but these are attributes of you. In a network perspective, what we want to know are the attributes of the relationships you have. We don't just want to know how many minutes you're on the phone. We want to know how many minutes you're on the phone to your mother. We want to know how many different people you call and how long you call them, and do they call you back. So we're interested in figuring out, how does A relate to B and does B relate to A? We're very interested in A and B. We spend all day thinking about A and B and how they're related to each other. And we'll note that these relationships can be imbalanced. Sometimes they go in only one direction, sometimes they can go in both. There is the relationship lends money to. That seems to go in one direction, I find. The people I lend money to do not seem to lend me money back. There's a relationship gives a ride to the airport also, for whatever reason. Very lopsided, that relationship. There is the relationship is married to. And sociologists have studied this at length, and they have found that if you are married to somebody who is not married to you, we recommend counseling. But that's a relationship that's supposed to go in both directions. You're not supposed to be able to be married to somebody who's not married to you. So these relationships can also come in magnitudes, right? There is you call mom, but mom calls you 10 times for every time you call her. And then there's, how long you're married, or, there's all sorts of attributes of the actual connection. Turns out you can write everything you need to know about how A connects to B in a row in a spreadsheet. There you go. And all you need to do is put what we call the thing, we call it Vertex 1. The mathematicians got here before us. We're going to use their language. They call these things vertices, and the things that connect to vertices, they are an edge. And so the edge is the row. The row is one row, one edge. It's vertex 1, vertex 2, the thing that sent the message, the thing that received the message, something about the relationship, and then things that we know about the entities. So we might know that A replied to B on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., and that we know that A is very, very tall and that B is very, very short. These are things that we might all write down on an edge. This looks like this in a spreadsheet. Those are edges. You could type them yourself right now. You probably have data that looks like this. If you are a community manager, your database is made out of this. It's who replied to who, and how often, and when, and with what payload. And if you can get your data into anything that looks vaguely like this, we can press just a few buttons, and we will tell you network things. Not just things like, well, how many messages per unit time? Tuesday morning's a really peak time for us. That's great. But is it a peak time for connection? So we can know things different from a lot of other kinds of tools. You got 10,000 people to talk about your hashtag, but what kind of crowd did they form? Did they just retweet you, in which case they formed a kind of broadcast pattern of a hub and spoke? Or did they talk to each other, forming a community, which would look very different, a very dense pattern? And so what we've done is applied the tool so frequently and so broadly, and you can do it too. It's now so easy. It can even be automated. Right now, as I'm standing here, we have servers in the cloud making maps all day. We have lots of students and lots of faculty, lots of commercial researchers making maps. And the more maps you make, like the more pictures of America you take, the more you start to get a sense of what this place is really like. And what we've come to see is that there are at least 6 basic types of patterns that form, at least in Twitter. We think they form like this anywhere a certain kind of edge exists. That edge is reply. If I can reply to you, these 6 patterns can form. Not every site has reply. Wikis, no reply. There's you edited, I edited. The concept of me replying to you is very vague. There's a talk page. Yes, there's sequential stuff there, but the talk page is not the wiki page. And so the wiki page itself, no reply really. There's sequential edit. And so by comparison, email, reply. Twitter, reply. A lot of sites, reply. If you have reply, then you end up with these patterns. And they're not all the same. So we've seen one already. It's talking about anything related to politics in America gives you the first pattern. It's the divided pattern. We have helpfully colored it red and blue. And so this is whenever you have 2 groups of people talking about the same topic, but they will not talk to each other. Because social media is not about arguing with people you disagree. It's about yelling with people you agree about people with whom you disagree. It's, hey, red people, don't we hate blue people? And hey, blue people, don't we hate red people? Let's hate red people more. That's what social media is for. And so we wrote a paper a little while ago with Pew Research, and you can find it at pewinternet.org, in which we documented these 6 basic types. We drew pictures of each of these types. We provide data samples, and I will show you the shapes that emerge in these patterns, and then we'll look at those 6 types again. So a common pattern is the hub and spoke pattern. It's the lots of people are retweeting me pattern, but they're not talking to each other pattern. And this is the pattern of audience. And that's a wonderful pattern to create in social media, especially if your job was to create an audience. But it's not the only pattern in social media, and so I am hopeful that we will see the value of these other structures. Because when you are a hub and spoke, what you have created is an audience rather than, let's say, a community. There are also the people in the network who are the bridge. There's our bridge. If you are a bridge, do you have many connections? No. You only have two, really. Typically, bridges, they're not Y-shaped. They're usually just straight A to B kind of things. So the metaphor of the bridge is just to deliver the idea that it's not how many connections you have that matter in network theory. It's how unique your connections are. And so imagine this scenario. There are two divisions, marketing and sales. And within sales, there are two people. And one person knows 200 people in sales. And the other person knows only a few people in sales. But they know one person in marketing. If no one in sales knows anybody in marketing, except for that one person who knows one person in marketing, that person, we would say in network theory, has betweenness centrality. They are the bridge. And to be the bridge does not require that you have many connections, just that you have unique connections. The more unique, the better. What do you find on one side of the Golden Gate Bridge? That's a good answer, but not the one I was looking for. The answer was San Francisco, not the one I was looking for. I was looking for toll booth. My point is that when you are at the gatekeeper position, you can often tax transactions that go over your link. And so being the only person in sales who knows anybody in marketing is a sign that HR has done a very bad job, admittedly. But it does mean that that one person has enormous power if any communication between sales and marketing is necessary. And so one message that network theory gives us, one piece of advice, is be a bridge. Be the person who connects otherwise unconnected groups. Don't be an island, but don't undervalue them. Most systems will never credit an island. An island is the person with no connections, the person with 0 links. How could they be influential? Most influencer systems will not consider these people to be influential. And yet, new customer acquisition candidates, who would you like? Somebody who's not yet connected to your community, but has mentioned your brand. Well, they would look like that in network theory. And so network theory suggests that people who are isolates are actually very valuable. They are not the periphery. They are the source of new membership. And in sociology, social movements theory says your movement is either recruiting new members or it is dying. Because, sad fact, humans are mortal. So what we need are methods that recognize potential new recruits. And isolates, being an isolate is a good indicator. And so we can now look at these maps. Here's the map for the word influencer marketing. I wish I had a laser. I'll pretend I do. Over there is the group of people who are isolates. These are the islands. These are people who have no connections at all to anyone else, and nobody said their name either. And that is an indication that this word is a brand. People can actually come up with the word influencer marketing without retweeting it. It's also mostly a broadcast pattern. Most of these groups are hub and spoke patterns. There's one person in the middle and a lot of people are retweeting them. It's not a community. And so it's a way of seeing the space. Oh, you have a laser. That's great. Thank you. Audience participation, I appreciate it. So we see, there you go, laser. A little hub and a bunch of spokes, and what we have is an inner retweet ring and an outer retweet ring. We have a bunch of retweet rings here. Here's only one. So each of these is telling us that this is a topic largely driven by about a dozen broadcasters, people who are out there tweeting, and they're getting an audience of people who are retweeting them. But overall, it's not a place that is dominated by community. It's not a place where we talk to each other. And so in our report, we make it fairly easy to see who are the 10 most central people. And then in order to facilitate a network-driven engagement strategy, we imagine that if you could identify the most central, most influential people, what would you do next with them? You might follow them, because you are going to attempt to create a relationship with them. In order to do that, we have given you the follow button. And so if you wanted to, you could then follow these most central people. In addition, we have this thing, the smart tweet button. We'll talk about that in just a second. That's a way to customize your engagement with them. This tells us about what the top hashtags are. We also do this for words and word pairs. The idea is to consume 10,000, 100,000 messages from 1,000 or 10,000 people and derive from it the answers to the questions that you might have without requiring you to read 10,000 or 100,000 messages. And what questions might you have, given that you don't want to read 100,000 messages? You might want to know, well, who are the key people here? Are there neighborhoods? Is there a dividing line? And if so, what makes group 1 different from group 2? Are they, you know, in what way are they oriented differently? And what are they linking to? And so we want to answer these questions. We want to make it so that you can essentially take a pile of social media, wherever it comes from, run it through the juicer, and come out with a distilled essence of it. So this allows some researchers to actually say some meaningful things about social media now, because we can send you out there with a camera. You can take a few pictures. You could compare those pictures over time. This is something that has been difficult to do for most people because it would require that you be the coder who could write this from scratch, and there's only a few of those, and we can't afford them. And so what we want to be able to do is answer questions like, you know, given that social media is made out of a network, what can we know about that network? In the Pew report, we note that we can describe the 6 basic types. I'm going to show you what those 6 types look like in the real world. These are the 6 data sets that are sort of archetypes. This is people talking about US tax policy. This is C-Manager chat. C-Manager chat, CMGR chat, the community manager chat, which is like Mayberry RFD, right? I mean, everybody likes everybody. There is not an out group. We do not have a dividing line. We don't hate each other. We're also not a brand. It's not like people casually mention C-Manager chat. You got to be in or you're out. You either have never heard of it or you're in. And so that's what an in-group looks like. This is talking about the Lumia, a brand. And 53% of that is people who never say anybody else's name and nobody says their name. They're isolates, they're the islands. And that's what brands look like. They've got a lot of this. iPhone, 53% of iPhone tweets, no @ sign. Because people say things like, hey, I'm thinking about getting an iPhone. And they just sort of say it to the world. And it's different than talking to people. And in OCTribe or in community manager chat, almost everything is directed at somebody by name. And so these are very different patterns. This is the clustered community pattern. It's basically brand, but you've got more of the communities on the side. This is the hub and spoke pattern we call broadcast. And this is the same pattern, but it's actually the mirror opposite. Instead of the arrows going in, I tweet, a lot of people retweet me, the arrows point inward. The opposite happens in support. This is Dell listens, Dell cares. It's trying to anyway. And in this case, it is a hub account. It is replying to many people. And of course, you have a problem with your laptop, you have a problem with your laptop. I've replied to you, I've replied to you. Do you now want to have a conversation? No. Also irritated by Dell. What a great common feature. You know, marriages are started with less. And so here's zoomed in view. So this is, we can't talk to each other. We're Americans, right? This is the hashtag My2K. The president, November 28th, 2014, I think. The President of the United States says, I want you to use the hashtag My2K. This is going to be the $2,000. The failure to act on the tax code is going to impose an increased tax on every household. And he says to his supporters, use this hashtag. Tell me what that $2,000 is going to be meaning to you. You know, mom's not going to get that operation. Kid's not going to get to go to school, that kind of thing. No doubt that was the political goal. Who else shows up to the party? Oh, these people. Who else shows up to the party? They are not that happy. right? These are the supporters. These are the not supporters. If they have an American eagle, you know who they are. But you know, they are the GOP, TCOT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are the Connect the Left. If you're using the hashtag GOP Medicare killers, well, you know, it takes more research to figure out what side you're on. But this is community manager chat. Very different pattern. It's all in group. Everybody's talking to everybody. This is Lumia, very fragmented, very, very different pattern. This is people talking about the First Lady of the United States, also a brand. We call it the clustered community pattern. It has more of these clumps alongside it. This is the broadcast pattern. That is Paul Krugman, the economist, Nobel Prize winning columnist for the New York Times. He will often tweet a tweet that looks something like, I have written an article. Here is the URL. And then what happens? Hundreds of people retweet him. That looks like this. They form an audience. They do not connect to each other, but they've retweeted him. They formed the circle pattern, the hub and spoke pattern. Over here, though, this is a community. I am clearly destroying your battery, but there you go. There, that one I don't know. Yeah, that's about it. But so the group 3 here, that's what it looks like when people actually talk to each other. There's a mesh, there's a webbing there, there's density of connections. You don't just get this wagon wheel, you get this pattern of connection that says community. We actually have a number for this. Density is the number. And so we can tell you the difference between just having 10,000 people come through the door and forming an audience and having maybe 1,000 people come through the door and forming a community. And depending on your goal, one might be better than the other. And the one that's bigger in just raw numbers may not be the one that's better. And so this is what support looks like. This is Dell trying to listen, trying to care. It's replying to all those people. Notice what happens when community forms in a support environment. Is it good for the brand or bad? Well, let's read the hashtags of the community groups, the ones where there is more density. What kinds of words start coming up there? Let's see. No solutions, more problems, Dell hell. Let's see. Shitty service, not impressed. Dell doesn't give a, never mind. And so these groups over here where people are starting to talk to each other, when people talk to each other in a support context, it's bad news. Because that's when the two of you have become so incensed with Dell that you are willing to talk to each other about how angry you are at Dell. Not knocking Dell. Yeah. And indeed, we do this a lot for airlines, and you can usually see, I mean, there is the famous United breaks guitars, but I have documentation of Qantas hates mandolins. And interestingly, in the map that I could dredge out, it shows that that tweet bounces around inside of a cluster, sort of like shrapnel. And that cluster is made out of industry analysts. Because people who talk to each other about an airline are not tourists. They're people who care about the stock performance of that company. And so they're hearing and seeing, boy, they're really doing customer service poorly, aren't they? And that has an impact on the stock price when your analysts start saying, wow, I hear you're doing customer service poorly. So there is a book, you've now seen it, it's gone floating around here. If you put an email address, I will send you a PDF of the book, and very tasty spam will go with it. You'll like it. Yeah, we saw that, well, first we built the map. We then look for the sentiment of the keywords. We have a way of flipping the color of the edge to red if they say any of the magic words that you don't want an airline passenger to say. And it turns out that the words bag and luggage are two of the words you don't want an airline passenger to ever say, which is a feature of our sentiment thing that basically you can type in the words that you think are bad words and the words you think are good words, rather than normal sentiment, which thinks bag and luggage are pretty innocuous words. But that a good thing about an airline said no one ever when they tweeted about their bag and luggage. I mean, whoever got off of a flight and said, oh, I really love the baggage handlers. So, but then we could see it bouncing around inside of a cluster. When you look in that cluster, what do you find? You find people who are talking about the stock performance. So, and you'll get a copy of the PDF of the book. So what we're trying to do is automate this data flow. You get some data, you put it in the machine, it's going to grind it up, it's going to draw a picture of it, it's going to write a report, and then it's going to publish the report. 5 steps you've got to do for every data analysis ever. And so we're going to put all of that under a button called Automate, then you hit Run, and then you get coffee. And we don't provide the coffee. But at the end of the coffee, we provide a very tasty data set that we hope will reveal these things. Who's the mayor? What are they talking about? What are the neighborhoods? Who actually bridges the divide, particularly with political topics? Knowing the one person who's actually getting heard across the aisle, very interesting stuff. And so for anyone out there, we imagine you would want to ask these 4 questions. What's my graph look like? Good question. We'd be happy to help you answer that question. What does my competitor's graph look like? Ooh, very interesting and helpful when you're trying to calibrate, because often the question of how well are we doing in social media is a tough question, because you are, for example, not South by Southwest. You know, they do really well in social media. Let me tell you, boy, do they do well. I mean, gather all, it's like the black hole of social media energy. You know, all the biggest social media output people are gathered in one place at one time. Boy, do they do social media well. Do you want to compare your brand or social media effort to them? No, no. And so you might want to pick better comparative, you know, accounts, and we would make their map too, and then of course ask the question, well, are you ahead or are you behind? What do they do different than you? What would you like to emulate? What's a reasonable expectation for a brand or a topic of your sort? And then you are going to intervene. That was the point, right? You're going to change your behavior in some way. You're going to interact with some people more in a different way, other people less, or in a different way. And we want then some very positive change to occur. What is that positive change? We want to amplify the propagation of your messages. Your messages should go viral. Well, what's the ingredient of a viral message? Start with a cat. There you go. But that doesn't always work now, does it? Can't always use a cat. So it turns out I'm going to use a rhetorical question. What's the difference between viral and non-viral content? Absolutely nothing. So the difference between viral and non-viral content is who tweets it, not what's in it. I could tweet the telephone directory, and if the right mayors retweet my message, it will go viral because they have the potential to make things go viral. They're hubs, they're mayors, because they don't have to be, some celebrities are mayors, but not all mayors are celebrities. I'll put it that way. And so what we want to help you do is target your messages more effectively. And so now when you look at your maps, you should be looking at these saying, which one of the 6 types are we? Maybe we're a hybrid. Maybe we're a little of this and a little of that. But what did we want to be? If we're a brand, did we want to be a community? If we're doing broadcast, did we want to be a brand? And, you know, if we're divided, did we want to become unified? Or if we're unified, and maybe, I don't know, you're in the intelligence service of some organization, didn't we want to divide? How do we do that? And, you know, you would attack the things that link the community together. Not recommending that. So what would you do with a network if you wanted to use it strategically? We think that you would recognize that other people have a bigger audience than you do, and that you should borrow their audiences. And so we think that you should collect mayors. Mayors are the high betweenness centrality entities in your graph. They are not necessarily the people with the most followers. They are not necessarily the people who tweeted the most. They are the people at the center. And being at the center doesn't mean that you're not necessarily famous. You might be simply the one person in sales who can get a message to marketing. Maybe you're the only person who speaks English in your community, and you translate the tweet into your native tongue, and you're the bridge that allows that message to actually bounce around inside of a whole subgroup that you are not going to reach otherwise. So bridges, that, and technically speaking, this is betweenness centrality. This is the attribute that we think is most valuable. So first you find the mayors. They're the people with the betweenness centrality, and what we want them to do is to follow you, and you know, one good step might be to follow them. That could start it. But then you don't just want to follow them and maybe they'll follow you back and then we all feel good about ourselves. What we really want to do is get them to retweet you. I mean, that's the coin of the realm. You have a message. You would like to have it be heard. How do you get it to propagate? How do you make something be viral? You make it get retweeted by the viral makers, the mayors, because they can make anything go viral. Or more to the point, it's not going to go viral without them. They are what makes something viral. And so we suggest that you should use messages that look kind of like this. We consider this to be the scientifically perfect tweet. A couple of things to think about this. First of all, it starts with somebody's name. It's not a tweet. Hello, universe, come and look at my important message about my initiative. It's, hello, you. How are you? Hello, you. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I had a call with Twitter ad people a while ago, and they said not to include the hashtag if you're focused on getting people to click on the link, because anything else could get them to go to edge out, basically. Does that make sense to you, or?
No. I mean, I see each hashtag you add to a tweet as a lottery ticket. It's the address of a community. And so you are trying to get the ear of a population. And in our approach, you're specifically trying to get the ear of a particular person in that population. And now we ask that, yeah, hold on.
I don't want to take you out of your slides, but I just want to reiterate this for the tweet concept. What I heard is that the tweet that is perfect not only engages hashtag, but is a one-to-one conversation in public. So it looks like you're having a conversation, but you're very aware and self-conscious of the fact that it is in public.
Yeah, you're intentionally being overheard while having a conversation with the macher. Whoever is the person who is in the center of the room, we would like to get their attention. And what we consider to be the perfect tweet is one that first says the name of that mayor by name. It's directed to them. Second, it contains the hashtags and words that they have demonstrated are most interesting to them. And so I would disagree with the nice people at Twitter ad sales who probably have the interest of selling you some ads. And I would argue you show that hashtag to the mayor almost as a bona fide. You care about cats. I care about cats too. It's a way of showing that you have actually heard enough of their content that you know that this is sort of the banner that they march under and that you're going to march under it too. But we only include, 2 of their hashtags, 2 of their words, and then we get to the important part, which is my hashtag, my URL, which if we are going to use the metaphor of virality, I'd point out that in virology, people who study viruses note that viruses actually come in 2 parts. There are 2 basic pieces of a virus, and one is called the payload, the other is called the can opener. The payload is the DNA sequence that creates more of the virus. It needs to get that DNA into the cell, the host, in order to replicate it, because the virus itself can't replicate itself. But if you have all that DNA and it's on the outside of the cell, it goes nowhere. You got to get the DNA in the cell. The virus must get through the cell wall. Therefore, it has another part, and that part is called the can opener. And the can opener gets through the cell. It's actually a sharp piece of DNA that cuts through the cell wall and gets the rest of the payload in. We need a can opener. If I can't say your name and prove to you that I care about something you care about, I can't get your attention. This is the can opener. But let's talk about the DNA. Let's talk about the payload. My URL, my hashtag. You're absolutely right. It is, I'm adding more hit targets other than my URL that the user could conceivably hit. But I have to trade off the cost of losing them to a click to the hashtag rather than to my URL by the fact that they're not going to look at my tweet unless I show them that I am talking to them about something they care about. And I'm not even going to get the general population's attention if I can't get a mayor's attention. Because unless the mayor is going to retweet it, we're never going to get a hub and spoke pattern that contains your hashtag and URL. And so this is what you need to do, we believe. You do these two things at the same time, and then good things happen. You identify mayors, and you engage them, and then you generate content, and you target it at mayors, and it has a can opener, and it has a payload. The payload is obviously your URL and your hashtag. There can be nothing else. But the can opener, we select the right host, and then we try to say the magic words to him or her that prove that we know what she's interested in, and we're going to talk to her in a way that, you know, those magic words in between, news about your brand using their words. This is the creative writing moment. This is the part that a lot of us got into the business in the first place for, right? We were good at writing and communicating. We weren't necessarily all that great at calculating betweenness centrality. And so let's get back to the creative writing moment, which is, you there, you're important, I see that, I understand, and you care about X and Y. I can come up with some creative writing explanation why X and Y lead to Z, and Z is my hashtag and my URL. That's the creative writing that has to be done. You could do that relatively quickly, we think, by using what we call the smart tweet feature. Here you've got the follow button next to everybody, and then also a smart tweet button. There we have their URL, their hashtag, a couple of hashtags, a couple of the words, then your hashtag, your URL. And you know, we don't send that tweet for you. We are not an artificially intelligent robot. We are just doing the milling of the grist for you. We're giving you a first draft. We very much think that you, a human being, should give this some thought. You should be thinking, should I even be talking to this person? When you're engaging politically divisive topics, some of these people are not your friend and never will be. And a human with a brain who has domain expertise, who's aware of the situation, should be at the switch. But we think we can help you there at the switch. You know, if you're a mass transit user, we hope that by going through these reports on your phone, you know, in the 20 minutes that you're on the tram, the trolley, on the Muni, on the bus, you could get a lot of your engage with influencers done. And then have a conversation with the 300 people that really matter in the topics that matter to you, rather than attempting to reach an audience of 300,000. Shouting at 300,000 people as if all 300,000 of them will hear you, when in fact there's really only 300 of them in that 300,000 that matter, at least in terms of who has the voice that is heard by the others. Talk to them, and talk to them about what they care about. And so when we look at these patterns, we see that many people give up too soon. They declare victory with phase one. They have created an audience. They can show that they are tweeting or they are posting, and people are liking and they're commenting and they're retweeting, and they have an audience, and we're done. But there are these other phases of matter, you know, the way that water, you know, there's the solid and the liquid and the gaseous form. Social media comes in multiple forms too, and you may not want to be satisfied with phase one. You may think, you know, we need some brand activity. We need to be able to have people saying our name without actually repeating us. Or better yet, when people repeat us, we want them to be repeated. We want our audiences to get their own audiences. And then ultimately, we shouldn't be satisfied until we've actually built a community. And a community is a group of people who talk about you even when you're not there. And so a community forms connections to itself rather than just to you. And they're durable because people come back because people are waiting for them. And so some of these shapes are going to be better than others. But once you're starting to become sensitized and aware that you have a shape, that you're in a shape, you're in a location in one of these shapes, well, now you're able to think link. you're starting to have network consciousness. You're starting to think about the shape of relationships, not just the volume of them. And when that happens, then our work is being achieved. That's what we want you to do. We want you to essentially become sociologists, to see the world in a sociological way, and that tends to be less individualistic than you might find in the typical places here in America. We don't think you're an individual. We think you're the result of all of the relationships you have. And that luckily I'm in San Francisco and I can say that. In some parts of the country, you're not allowed to say that. But it's true, and once you start to see these networks, you can see that you might want to actually change the shape of the graph, not just the number of people. You might want to actually change the shape. You want to move from one of these states to a different one. And this is a diagram from a paper, and there's a link in the slides, and the slides will be on the web. But it suggests at each intersection, if you want to go from the one to the other, that there is a network metric that can act as a KPI, a key performance indicator for the non-corporate speakers out there. I speak corporate as a second language. And so if it's a KPI, it can actually guide you from state one to state two. Maybe we're a brand, we want to become a community. We're a community, we want more brand. Typically, humans being what they are, they're never happy with what they are. And so you always want to be something else. So if you would like to be something else, you could start by asking for a map. You can come to connectedaction.net. There's a request a map button. Try it there. And we'll send you a map. A few people have. We could, let's see, go jump out and take a look at some of those maps because we have them up here. We have OCTribe. This is C Manager Chat. There's N10org. I think I have things like, oh, here's TechSoup. I think that one should be the one we look at. I see. That's not the one we should look at. Don't look, folks. Let's go back to OCTribe. And let's see, where was OCTribe? Here is OCTribe from Twitter. And this is just for the last 21 days of traffic. So there we all are. Of all of us, this is the top most influential. NodeXL is currently the most influential person in the OCTribe community. That's nice. But there you all are, and I'll note, your rank has no relationship to your follower count, right? People with high follower counts are at the bottom and low follower counts at the top. It's your position here within this community that matters. It's interesting that you have a high follower count. We call some of these people visiting dignitaries. You know, when Oprah tweets your hashtag, that's great, but it's not like she's really the mayor because, you know, she won't be here tomorrow. And the locals don't react to her that way. Somebody else could be the mayor, somebody much smaller. And so knowing how to interact with the B-listers, wow, you know, B-listers aren't already jaded, don't already have somebody else to talk to other than you. And so talking to the B-listers can be very useful. What to talk to them about, of course, we give you a report of all the content, the hashtags, the words, the word pairs, as well as the people who are just mentioned a lot or talked about a lot or tweet a lot, which is interesting, but we still think that the top influencers, the people who are at the center of things, are really the most influential, not just the people who tweet a lot. At the bottom of every one of these pages, you will find links to the workbook. So if you have NodeXL, you can just download the workbook and you then have the data set. If you don't have NodeXL, you still get a workbook. You just don't get the pictures. You still get the rows and columns of data. And so it's safe to send a NodeXL workbook to somebody, even a Mac user. They can still open it up and look at the data. They just don't see the picture. And the last link here is actually the recipe. And that's an interesting concept. If you download that file and put it into your copy of NodeXL, you can hit the automate button and it will do to your data what the author of this data did to their data, which is to say that you can import the expertise of the most expert users of NodeXL to the least expert users, new users, welcome, of NodeXL. And so you don't have to struggle that much. Once you learn the take a recipe from somebody else, put it in NodeXL, get data from a data source, run automate. You've learned NodeXL. What you then need to do is spend your time looking at a map and saying, well, what can I learn from this map? What does this tell me, really? What could I do with it? And what it tells me is these are the URLs that people are linking to. These are the hashtags that they're also using. These are the people who are important. These are the people I should engage. And so we think that this might be useful for you, that you would do this for the hashtags, your own brand names, the topics and issues, the URLs that are interesting. It's always great to grab a New York Times URL and throw it through this and see who's tweeting about that article. Oh, that's interesting. Especially when you've got a very contentious issue, you've got legislation out there and people are taking sides, you can really see those sides. Until very recently, I would frequently make the Keystone XL map. And gosh, there are some people who really want to talk about jobs, you know, and you wonder, who are those people? And they're like, you know, Trans Canada Energon or something like that. And they're all in their own little cluster. You can really see when controversial issues are really not that controversial. They just have this 15% of the population cluster that's just really noisy. And I think that's an interesting thing to reveal with a network map. The last presidential election cycle, Topsy and USA Today ran an article every day, which showed a red and blue jiggly line that said that it was telling you the positive and negative sentiment of these two candidates. Given what you know now about the two clustered nature of political controversies, if I tell you that one day there's more negative about Obama, what does that tell you? Does it mean that Obama supporters have gone and become Romney supporters, or does it mean that Romney supporters have chosen this day to become more negative on Obama, which is news, but different news than the news suggested by USA Today that, gosh, people are leaving and going to the other side. Hey, if this is where we are doing our culture, we're going to need to document what is civic life now on the internet. And that is, who showed up and said what? Because right now, any journalist anywhere can say anything they like about, and then things went viral on Twitter. And anybody can find 2 or 3 tweets. The question is, overall, if Twitter is going to be this landscape of the social for us, and maybe Facebook, YouTube, all these other places too, what's it really look like when a crowd gathers and talks about a controversial topic? I think we should make a camera, put it in the hands of thousands, and see if they can take enough pictures that will help us learn what that landscape looks like. Hope you'll take a picture too. Thanks for coming. I'd happily take questions. Yeah. Thank you. Questions, queries, comments, concerns? Is there a mobile app for that? Your browser, yeah. Yeah, it's Safari, yeah, it's a web browser. Yeah. In the corner there.
People who were on the live stream and not here in person get the book.
They would email me, and that's Marc, M-A-R-C, at smrfoundation.org. Thank you. And then there's a question here, sir.
Yeah, my question was, what's the very first step if you want to do your own network mapping? I mean, because it gets confusing in that, you know, normally to create the Excel sheet, you need a tool that will output everything, right?
Oh, we have, the importers are right in there.
Okay, so it's all there. So you just, if you were going to do...
This is NodeXL. There it is. Let's see. Let's go find another copy of it, like here. And it has importers. And those importers give you access to Twitter and Flickr and YouTube and all the rest of it. And so, but the very first step is to simply go to Connected Action and ask for one. But there's the importer list. Instagram, our own graph server, Facebook, Flickr, more Instagram, some Twitter, YouTube.
API connections access their data stream.
Yeah.
You set the
Depends on the end point. With Facebook, you can say when you want the data from. With Twitter, it's either now or never. So there's the Twitter importer. You say what query term. You don't really get to say when. You get to say how much, but you don't get to say more than 18,000. 18,000's it. And then it starts with now and goes back. And so the rules are different on each of the platforms. We comply with each of them. Yeah. And so, but the simplest way to start is right here. There's the request a map button up at the top. You go here, and once you request a map, that'll just take you to the form. You tell me what topic you would like mapped, and we'll go and map it. There's the form right there. Sir, you want your laser back, I understand. Yes, of course. Yeah.
I will get it.
Yeah, okay.
So these are snapshots. I mean, to use your camera.
Yeah, they're long duration snapshots because they may be a week. They could be 6 months. Often, if you just go to Twitter, you're going to get as little as a few minutes. You know, if you want some Hillary tweets, boy, they got lots, but they're coming fast and furious right now. So you might get 8,000 or 10,000 tweets, and they may cover a duration of 58 minutes. In some cases, we're running a server in the back end that's constantly gobbling up tweets using the stream and multiple hits to the REST API. So there's some technology behind the curtain about how do you maximize what you harvest from a public API.
But there's no way to do time series.
Oh yeah, it does do time series. Yeah, because it, here, let's see if I can show.
Change over time. So
Yeah.
you were talking about, moving your.
There you go. So this was, I heard somebody say the word community cloud. I made a map of the word community cloud. There's community cloud for the last few days. By the minute, no, I think this is by the hour, for the last week.
Okay. But that's not showing the change in graph.
I have a slider for you where it tells you, here's the time range and where's the beginning and the end time, and you move it across and the edges appear and disappear depending on the time window. So sort of. What I think you want that I don't have is the one button that you press and it just does all that for you.
Well, yeah,
Right, I know that button. We have a list with that button on it.
weather channel.
Right.
And the rain comes.
Yes. Right now, it's the kind of thing that very obsessive graduate students do 100 times, changing it each time, and then they make flip movies, and they like that. We have a feature on the pending list, which is you set the start time, the end time, and the interval, and the jump, and you say go, and then we output a stack of GIFs and turn them into a movie for you. That feature does not exist yet. But this does. You can see the time series, and there is a filter feature where you can actually move the window manually.